Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Sean Stanley. I'm the head of Globe Content Studio at the Globe and Mail. And on behalf of the studio and the Globe generally, I would like to welcome all of you to today's webinar. I just wanted to provide a little bit of background as to why we chose the topic that we chose today, and a little bit about what the Globe does in terms of metrics, just to sort of set things up. And then I'm going to turn things over to my colleague Jessica and let her take things from there. So when we first started thinking about the topic for this month's MarTech Mornings, we thought, let's try to get away from topics around COVID. We've been talking a lot about COVID-related impacts on health and the economy and the way it's impacted small businesses and other parts of the marketing and advertising worlds. And now that we're about 6 months in, and while cases around the country are, yes, increasing in many provinces, we've still sort of settled into, I guess, what you would call a semi-new normal at this point. So we thought a lot about what we've been discussing internally as a team around content marketing. And one thing that comes up a lot is metrics. So what's the most common question that clients ask us at the conclusion of a content marketing campaign is how many page views did we get? And it's a question that has been asked for many years running now. And it got me thinking that why is that still the number one thing that people are asking? Is that still the most important metric when it comes to a content marketing campaign? What are the current most important metrics? What are some of the future metrics that maybe some people are using, but not everybody? Or what are some of the things that might be coming? And that's what got us started around today's topic and around the panelists that we chose to participate today. For a little bit more background, just to talk about the Globe and Mail generally, because we're a media organization, and so we have a little bit of a different approach when it comes to metrics around what the newsroom is aiming to do and what the content studio, as the content marketing division of the media organization, is aiming to do. So the newsroom, because we have a subscription-based model, is really focused on engagement. The more stories that get a high amount of engagement, the better that is, not only for us as a metric, but also for driving the subscriptions that we are trying to achieve from a newsroom perspective. When it comes to the content studio, we're still very much driven by page views or clicks, the most number of people that we can get for any given campaign. And engagement, of course, is important, but we all know the difficulties of achieving both of those metrics together. It's sort of the holy grail, but not always the easiest thing to do. So one of the things we talk about a lot when it comes to optimization is how do we get a broad swath of people, but how do we also bring engagement to the table as part of every program? So that was the starting point for today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Robinson, who's a content strategist within the Globe Content Studio. She's going to introduce our fantastic set of panelists for today and then lead our discussion. So Jessica, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us this morning. As Sean said, I'm Jessica Robinson. I'm a content strategist with the Globe Content Studio. And just before I go about introducing our panelists, I want to mention that in the bottom left corner of your screen, you have the questions and answers box. And so we really encourage you to submit any questions that you have, and they can potentially be answered by our panelists at the end of the stream. So definitely take a look, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. So we have three incredible panelists who come from a variety of backgrounds and knowledge sets when it comes to metrics that I'm going to introduce here, beginning with Ashley Cohen, who is the Principal Analytical Lead at Google. We also have Casandra Campbell, who's the Testing and Experimentation Lead at Shopify. And we have Matt Celuszak, who is the CEO of CrowdEmotion. And so without further ado, we're going to get right into it. And Casandra, I'd love to start with you and ask, in your day-to-day, what metrics do you most often use to measure the success of a content marketing campaign?
Well, it depends on the campaign, of course. We've got a pretty big business at Shopify, and so we use content in a lot of different ways. But I think the biggest focus for us is usually customer acquisition. So we're trying to really inspire potential entrepreneurs, educate them, help them along that journey to starting a business. So we actually do still really care about page views and sessions. We want to see that we're because traffic from search engines is really the most sustainable traffic source. That's the traffic that's going to keep coming back next week, next month, next year. And it's also a good sign that you're doing content. And then we look at a mix of conversions. So it could be more upper funnel, like are they subscribing to the newsletter? Are they signing up for webinars? Even are they coming back? Do they want to keep reading more of our content? But it could also be lower funnel, like do they actually start taking that first step, starting a business, signing up for a free trial? And then I think the other big thing that we look at a lot for us as a software business is product adoption. So when we're creating content to really educate and explain how our products work or show the value of them.
Definitely. And I think you sort of hit the nail on the head at the start there, where it really depends on the campaign and it depends on what the business is looking to do and what the ultimate KPI is. And with that, I want to turn to Ashley. Ashley, last year you wrote a really thought-provoking article that I came across where you really encourage brands to determine whether they're asking the right questions when it comes to measuring their success of campaigns, namely whether they're measuring what matters most and whether they're supporting the actual projects that are performing and growing their business. For our purposes, I'd love to hone in on the first part of that question. How can clients determine what they should be measuring?
Yeah, awesome. That's a great question. And it's actually a question that I really kind of love to answer, because the path you take to get to that answer really uncovers a lot of insightful, important information about your business. So it's really important before kind of answering that question to take a step back and evaluate what your strategic objectives are as a business, both in the short and the long term. So long term, it might be, becoming the #1 inflatable pool brand in the world. And it's great to have that as your long-term goal because it can really inform our shorter-term goals and our shorter-term strategy. So, for example, our shorter-term strategy might actually be to become known as a brand, have people understand what your business is about. But in order to do that, you have to have a business that's growing. And to grow and continue to be a viable organization, you need to sell your product or service. There needs to be sales, whether it's from your site, whether it's from your store, whether it's from your parents' garage. So to take a step forward from our long-term goals, our short-term goals are to grow our business. And what this looks like might be different based on, your specific business model. So similarly to what Casandra was talking about a bit earlier, do you want to drive more customers from you to buy one time? If you're selling an inflatable pool, that's not something that people necessarily buy on a monthly basis. So you're kind of a one and done business. Are you more of a subscription-based model? Do you want to build up a client base of recurring revenue? And often with a lot of businesses, this might be a combination of these things, especially if you sell inflatable pool accessories. And that's okay, because you should have a combination of metrics, a combination of goals, because businesses of both customers are complex. But once you have the short-term objective, the metric that you want to drive, this is going to become your source of truth for evaluating your efforts in marketing, in media, in your stores, etc. So to take this question a step further, there's so much available out there in terms of tools and infrastructure that will allow you to connect that information of your goal to your website and to the digital ecosystem that is going to allow you to drive insights. And more importantly, there are tools that will allow you to directly connect that metric to your digital ecosystem to drive your business. So the real key here is that you're pivoting away from a performance indicator that is focused on marketing to one that is focused on your business as a whole. So just to reiterate, what you really want to do is, 1, understand your business's objectives, both short and long term. 2, it's understanding what metric is going to drive those objectives, whether it's new clients, engagement with your brand, repeat clients, and then track everything you do against that metric as your source of truth to evaluate this and use the tech available to drive this and drive insights.
Amazing. And I mean, when you talk about tools and figuring out what it is that's going to help you achieve that result and ultimately achieve those goals for your business, Matt, it right away makes me think of you. And I want to step back a little bit. So for anyone in the audience who isn't familiar with CrowdEmotion, can you give us sort of the elevator pitch of what your business, CrowdEmotion, and more specifically Element Human, a CrowdEmotion company, does? Oh, I think you might be on mute there.
Oh, nope, there we go. Yeah, sorry. Thanks for having us. I appreciate that early in the morning. So look, I think we talk a lot about growth. We talk a lot about hard metrics in business. And from a business perspective, it's really important. As a business owner, it's really important. What's been missing in the ecosystem, we kind of saw this come to the fore, is this area around quality. What's the quality of engagement? Can we just continue to pump traffic through people's attention spans? The reality is humans only have about 24 hours in a day, and they got to allocate those hours to building their experiences. So I've been in the human measurement space for about 16 years, and I founded CrowdEmotion to basically answer the question of why do people do what they do, on probably a foolishly optimistic belief that the more we understand about people and ourselves, the better our world will be. Now, in very, very simple principle, we pulled together a team of machine and human behavior scientists that basically obsess over understanding kind of human behavior and human emotion as measured through everyday devices. So how do we turn our mobile phones, our devices that are entering, our smart technologies that are entering our everyday life, how do we turn those into human sensory devices? And how do we get signal out of that on whether people paid attention? Did they enjoy their experience? Did it create a memorable response? It's been 7 years in the making. We've collected over 2.5 billion data points across 450,000 people in 89 countries to help about 40 different brands and media owners understand the quality of engagement and what is relevant into driving those growth metrics, so that they can then finally dig into, how do I optimize a creative campaign? Is that creative campaign, has it lived its life in terms of helping me move people through the funnel with the right brand metrics that we're trying to measure, as well as achieving our growth metrics? And do we need to refresh it? Do we need to update it or whatnot? So it gives you a really good pulse check of the information that you can basically get off of everyday devices.
And when you talk about measuring emotions, I mean, what metrics are being evaluated to determine if a user felt excited or disgusted by an ad? And is it all facial recognition technology? Can you break it down a little bit for us?
Yeah, it's not all facial recognition technology, but it does start there. I think there's a couple of things that we have to be careful of with a lot of this stuff. First of all, emotions are incredibly personal. So the first thing I learned by blending a psychology department and an AI department at a university to get this kick-started was that a lot of psych theory was very generic and it was very human constructed. When you started to observe stereotypes that we would observe, like Asian people are less expressive. Well, actually, they're less expressive to Western cultures. But when I took it to China and Vietnam and Singapore, they were just as expressive as any other culture that we've seen. So it is about looking at the face. So you turn on the webcam with consent, and we run under UK law, so we're under GDPR. So the individual has full rights to their data. They can delete it, and we actually auto-delete our stuff after we pull the information off. So once you read the expression, you also understand where they're looking against the screen. So you understand that, and you get an attention metric. And then we also do a format of something called implicit testing, which is a memory test, looking at speed and reaction time. And then we blend that with what people said and click-based data to be able to understand how that all ties together. And again, it's been about 5 to 7 years of learning. And we've just platformed that. That's what the Element Human brand is. It's actually our platform of bringing it all together for brands.
Amazing. Yeah, that definitely helps clarify. And I think this is still a space that users really need demystified for them. And so that's a really clear understanding of how all of those metrics come together. And at the studio, I know we sometimes struggle with reconciling client requests, as Sean mentioned, to optimize for page views when ultimately engagement metrics like time spent on site or that sort of intention is actually a better indicator of the performance of a piece of content. So Ashley, I'd love to know, how do you educate businesses about the value of metrics beyond page views?
Yeah. So I think this goes back to the value of rooting your conversations around the digital ecosystem about what you care about as a business. Because if I were working with a business that is valuing clicks, as you mentioned, starting down the path of better measurement might be as simple as just kind of asking how those clicks impacted the metrics that the business actually cares about. And if the business is currently valuing clicks, there's probably going to be a lot of shrugging, and I'm not entirely sure, but this opens the door for a really great strategy session and discussion. And it may be, with a lot of businesses, taking this one step at a time. So to your point, something better than a click might be time spent on site. Something better than that might be them signing up for a newsletter, and from there, buying something on your site, going into your store, becoming a new customer. So it's really a conversation that allows us to go down the funnel to map out different levels of priority for each of these actions to your business, and to understand the value of each one of these actions. And you want to kind of take it all the way to the end of this exercise. If the most valuable metric to you is someone who comes to your site once a month to make a purchase, that's awesome, because that's going to take us to kind of the second part of this exercise in this conversation, which is working backwards at our most important metric to understand how we're actually going to kind of measure and proxy it. So this, there's a lot of different ways to do this. If you're a company that has like a really deep CRM system, just like a customer data management system, there are also digital marketing tools at your disposal to kind of connect this to what happens on your site and your digital marketing. So now the goal is to see where we can connect what happens before they get to your website with what happens on your website and what happens after. So if we have a breadth and depth of data to start creating models, for example, to predict whether someone becomes a repeat customer, this is really valuable in evaluating your digital media. If you want to evaluate something that happens after a user leaves the site, for example, that they come into your branch, your store, and sign up as a new customer, how can you leverage your tech infrastructure to match that back to your marketing data? And if you want to evaluate something that happens on your site, like a purchase, how can you make sure that this is tracked within your digital ecosystem? And if there's a value associated with that, a price, like how much they spent, how can we include it? And how can we go further to understand any value associated with that purchase? So, if this type of system isn't available, what then is the closest proxy you can use to get a sense of the impact your efforts have? So you might not know how many people walk into a store, but you can create a proxy like, every time a user spends 5 minutes on my site, they become a new customer. Or every user that visits my site 3 times or more becomes a new customer. And that kind of proxy is super valuable in evaluating it again. And once you've done that exercise, this is where the work is really going to begin. Once you identify what you care about, it's about connecting these systems together to get an understanding kind of whether your efforts are impacting your business outcomes, and then making adjustments and changes based on these insights, as well as by leveraging machine learning within your media. So really, if we can just start the conversation about what they're currently measuring and how it impacts their business, find a way to measure that metric or proxy that metric, we can drive a lot of insights and optimize our media towards that. And the value that you're driving is going to become self-apparent.
Definitely. And it's a lot of trial and error, I think, as well, especially for us when it comes to figuring out okay, so you think that this is the most valuable metric or ultimately the goal, but it turns out along the way, even through the content campaign, we find that there's a different part that's resonating and ultimately driving a different kind of performance that they're even more interested in, despite the fact that it wasn't the original goal. And Casandra, your title is Testing and Experimentation Lead. So, it's a very cool title, but it also really highlights how important testing and optimization is to a brand's growth journey. And so I have to assume that involves making a lot of mistakes along the way. And so in your experience, what are the biggest mistakes that marketers make?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, but I think actually not testing and iterating is one of them. actually talked about really developing that measurement strategy that supports your goals and your business model. But once you do that, I think it's really important to actually keep testing and learning, and as much as possible, really try and understand the incremental impact of what you're working on. It can be really easy to say, we think this piece of content is going to be really great, it's going to serve our goals, and just kind of do it and move on. But you need to sort of keep checking in regularly and saying, is this adding a net benefit to my business, to my marketing plan that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise? So if I got new subscribers from this blog post, would they have subscribed anyway from the existing content? Like, did that experimentation and rigorous measurement kind of two sides of the same coin, but the other thing I see is moving on too soon. So it's important to iterate, but it takes time to do well. It takes time to show an impact. We know can.
I think we're having just a little bit of trouble with your connection. But what we can do is circle back once we've given it a second just to reboot maybe. And I apologize too, because I think there's construction above. So just a whole host of work from home problems. But in talking about mistakes, I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that brands make is having access to all this information that's brought in through marketing campaigns, and knowing that it could give insight into your target audience and not making use of it, and not figuring out how to apply it for the better in future campaigns. So Matt, I'd love to know, how can Element human users take the information that the platform provides them with and turn that into actionable insights that can shape their content and their marketing moving forward?
Yeah, thanks. I definitely agree with the whole test and iterate. And like I said, we've kind of built the business trying to figure that out and on how this type of information, which really is more for the creator side. So these are people who are brand advocates. They're trying to understand how they can steal brand attention and break through into the brand cycle of people's everyday story, whatever that might be, whatever environment they might be on. They don't have any metrics to really tell you whether are we shifting the memory? Are we actually becoming nascent in somebody's mind so that they're aware and they'll actually think about us and decide on us? It's really hard to measure that stuff in the digital sphere. So you typically need to get out of there and into more human-based, and it was traditionally done very qualitatively. So what this does is this offers you a quantified and a codified approach to being able to start putting metrics around engagement. So when we worked with the BBC, we learned that you'd see these peaks of expressional intensity, and what we learned from there is it actually mattered less about which emotion it was and more about the actual intensity of the peak. And then when we measured it against brainwave activity, we actually realized that the peaks always preceded the brainwave spike for memory encoding by about 2 seconds. And it was really, really interesting from that standpoint. And that was really easy then for a creator to isolate what's causing the impact of memorability. And can I line that up from a storyline perspective into my brand recognition? We just did a recent project with a large American FMCG, CPG, we're in this market, that basically looked at, does my television commercial pare down into a nice 6-seconder or into a TikTok a campaign, and how does that impact things? And what was interesting there is we were able to say, these are the key impact moments by looking at how the audience came together on certain expressional journeys and where they overlapped at a very high confidence. And then being able to apply that to say, well, here's now your 6-second clip can be cut down to that and create the same type of intensity, say on Instagram as a story, or it can be then shifted over to TikTok. And in TikTok, how do we emphasize the brand a little bit better because it was actually not clear which brand it was. So with these attention, memory, and emotion metrics, you can start to tie that in to understand what's relevant to driving the behaviors around click, all the other elements that a lot of the click-based platforms are already set up to do. So we find that it dovetails nicely from a CMO who has to sit there, or a brand strategist who has to sit there and go, great, I'm going to spend my next 10 million on entering a new market. Who do I go talk to, and which media owners know their audiences offer that type of deep engagement that I can work with, so that we can work there. So most of our clients are very much premium media owners because they're looking at less strictly performance-based driven advertising. They are looking at branded storytelling as well.
Which I think is really the future of where this is moving, and how can we look at it from a larger perspective, and how can our content live in different iterations on these different platforms, and how can we optimize the same content for different KPIs? I think it's exactly where all of this is moving, for sure. And I mean, of course, we're talking about digital marketing, and we know that more and more businesses made the leap to e-commerce, especially in the last 6 months with the pandemic, when they didn't really have another option. But businesses do still want to drive foot traffic, and that's still something that they want to do through digital campaigns. And Ashley, you talked about this earlier in terms of building up the proxies. I want to just dive into that a little bit more. I think it's really interesting to figure out how retailers can measure that sort of conversion from digital to in-store.
Absolutely. I mean, there are definitely tools available that will help you measure that impact directly, whether it's completely directly or through a proxy. So this might be something like a proxy like store visits, which is a tool within the Google ecosystem that just kind of measures how many people clicked on a search ad and then went into a store that you could use to kind of back calculate out how many people bought from you. Or it could be kind of a custom data integration, which can get quite technical and quite complicated. So there's kind of these trade-offs between ease of use with a readily available tool and precision. So the more precise we get, the more work needs to be put in as we get kind of a more bespoke approach. But I think, Casandra spoke to this earlier. There's a lot to be said for a really thoughtful, well-planned test. So how can you design a test where you might just try a strategy in one region of your market and measure the results and compare it to another region of the market? So you might need to do a bit of recon on the stats side to make sure you analyze this appropriately. But this is really, really insightful and useful. Just deciding on a thoughtful test strategy that you consider up front when you're doing your planning. Knowing what questions you want to answer and the metric you're going to evaluate them against is a great way to approach it. And so you want to do a test, try it again, validate your results, change one factor, try a new strategy, try it again, decide what else is meaningful. So this is something, and Casandra did talk about this, that every company should be planning into their year looking forward and to their day-to-day work.
Definitely. Casandra, I just want to check in really quickly. Can you just speak, and we'll see if your mic's working? I do think we're still having trouble with the connection. So what I might do is send you through a question that's come through for you and move on to a question for the larger group, and then I can also read off your answer back. So just jumping ahead here, I mean, to say that the pandemic threw a wrench into trend predictions for 2020 is probably an understatement. But based on the changes that you've observed in the last 6 months, I'd love to know what all of you think is sort of the trends that you predict will peak in the world of content and marketing, but also technology in the coming months. Matt, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, to be fair, if I'm just, again, looking at our business, when we started, we were very much at the forefront of early adopters innovating with us, trying to understand how to use this information. Whilst we've been working with kind of the BBC and Condé Nast for the last 5 years to figure out how all this information stitches together, it was very much at an innovation type of spend level from budget. So if I'm to look at that, as soon as COVID hit, we saw an increase in our funnel go up about 36% growth month on month from media owners, from agencies, and directly from brands. And it was because they were really struggling to understand, well, what is my brand message? Because my entire strategy was kind of thrown out the window. Also, the other things that we've seen happen is very much around testing new formats. So really, what does Instagram look like? What does TikTok look like? What does YouTube look like from us, from a perspective of engagement? If we're going to look at somebody's day now that they're 99% time online, or awake time online, where do I fit in as a brand? So asking those questions and answering those questions were less performance driven and more at the brand level. So we were being asked to come back with kind of hyper agile, cost effective toolkits. And that's what we're seeing. This type of data is very kind of, it's perishable, it's emotions. So the way you felt before you walked into this conversation is different than when you leave. So it's very perishable. So again, it has to be rapid, it has to be quick, and relying less on kind of long-term forecasted trends. I think we'll get back there, but for the time being, I think brands are just figuring it out at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's how we've all felt, honestly, is just sort of figuring it out as we go. And even just in like non-marketing and tech trends, it's more like small peaks of what makes us feel good, and ultimately, what is it that's resonating with the current moment in time, not what's coming all these months down the line. But Ashley, I am interested in your answer to this question, knowing that Google has so much information in terms of sort of that predictive, what's coming, search engine oriented research and also ultimately data. So what do you think is up next?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's sort of two parts to that question. The first is, what was the consumer doing, and then what were companies doing to sort of respond? So my work specializes in the finance industry, and really at this point, consumers were looking for help. They were looking for help, and as this happened, and what products they were looking at for specifically really changed with the news cycle very quickly. So this was a matter of just really working closely with their clients so they could understand how to be helpful and responsive to their customers at any point in time. And this happened with mortgages, with credit cards, with lines of credit. This changed really quickly. Now, the second piece was how were kind of companies responding internally, and any sort of big disruption to the market obviously throws a ton of uncertainty. And this means really every company was revisiting their strategy, which often means reevaluating a lot of initiatives to find efficiencies. A great way to really become more efficient and demonstrate direct value is aligning marketing again with a business KPI rather than your marketing KPI. So I found a lot of clients, along with this, figuring out just how they could kind of help all of their customers from a more kind of upper funnel brand messaging perspective. They wanted to dive deeper into just investing in their infrastructure and measurement with just an increased focus on efficiencies. It meant that everything needs to be evaluated against what the business cares about. So marketers really need to make the case that they are an integral part of the business ecosystem that drives the business ecosystem, and that by aligning with what the business cares about, as well as overall making it very demonstrable, they can really impact how they're performing as a business.
Absolutely. And Casandra, are you able to share what you think is coming next in terms of trends in content marketing, but also technology?
I can't hear anyone else, so I don't know if you can hear me. Okay, we'll give this a go. Maybe I'll talk slow so the bandwidth doesn't get overloaded. Yeah, I mean, one thing that we have really seen at Shopify is a huge shift to e-commerce. Like, we talk about 10 years of growth happened in a matter of weeks and months. And so there's just this huge pivot to everything being online. And so, in the product space and retail businesses, that's, very difficult to ignore. But I think it also, it has huge product implications and huge content implications. It's funny, for the last 10 years, I think every year, people are like, this is the year video is going to take off. This is the year podcasts are going to take off. And it's been growing steadily every year, but this is really the year now. It's just, we've all spent so much time at home. We live so much of our lives online now, and it's probably going to be that way for a while. But now is really the time to start investing in other kinds of media, starting investing in channels you were afraid of, like TikTok. Like it's really, I think now is really the time, even though we've been saying that every year.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's true. This is almost, in some ways, been what has made digital, like, always been at the forefront, of course, but now it's almost the only. Like, this panel series is a really great example, because this was an in-person panel series that was hosted in Toronto, and ultimately was only available to people in Toronto, but also guests that were willing to travel or based in the city. And now, I mean, like, we've got Mac tuning in from Vancouver Island, and Casandra, you're out in New York City, and it's just like, we've really been able to open up and diversify our offerings when we can take these limitations and see them as opportunities. And I think, to your point, it's the exact same in terms of what we'll see an uptick in things like virtual panels, because, well, there's no physical panels. And so by process of elimination, almost, we're really seeing the peak and proliferation of video and podcasts and all these other media that we've been investing in, but now have lost out on a huge section of competitors. And Casandra, while we have your audio coming in crystal clear, I do want to check in. You had tweeted a few days ago about testing best practices as companies grow and users evolve. And that really struck me, because I think, and it's something I'm guilty of personally, once you have something that works, our instinct isn't to test it again, and to go back to it and to see if it's still the best practice. So how can companies go about effectively auditing their own best practices? Oh, it was so close. What I might do is turn that question to the rest of the room while we work on troubleshooting your audio. What practices do you, Ashley, and you, Matt, maybe starting with you, Ashley, how do you emphasize your best practice auditing in your own work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, just like touching on the themes that I was chatting about earlier today, just making sure that we can align ourselves with business KPIs are the number one best practice in really demonstrating the impact that you're having. And then I think, making sure that, and Casandra spoke to this a bit earlier, trying new things and testing new things is not going to be prohibitively expensive in any way. So how do we make sure that we're always having like a really strong test and learn culture, that we build this into our annual planning and our regular planning and are able to pivot quickly based on results and based on new opportunities?
Definitely. And Matt, same to you. How do you guys go about, I mean, you've done 5 to 7 years of refining and testing, and so I'm sure this is something you're really familiar with.
Yeah, so we typically get brought in for a design process, which is kind of right at the top end. We're working often with kind of the CMO and the marketing directors and the sales directors to understand what are actually the really big questions, because in a lot of cases, there aren't KPIs specifically that are measurable around a brand, or that are measurable at scale anyway. There are these kind of soft touch, typically done in a focus group or a one-to-one interview with customers, or really deep dive type of KPIs. And then how do you scale that out? So typically, first project would go into a kind of more bespoke test, and then we would configure it into the platform that allows you to scale it out and be able to make that connection back into your business. So again, it's very complementary to the stuff out there. It's not; these are addressing two different challenges, but it helps bring clarity and confidence around the creative decisions, around the brand decisions, when you are looking at how is that relevant to performance. And that's where artificial intelligence does offer a lot of really interesting stuff to work with. I think it's still very nascent, this type of stuff. And it's one of those ones where we're quite upfront with clients that you're walking into something where you have to be prepared for things to not work and other things will work. And if you have that conversation up front, I think a lot of clients are really game for that. They just have to know that it slots into more of the innovation. This is where things are going to break so they can manage their internal stakeholders. Because the last thing anybody wants is, a cost-effective, cheap research project to topple a whole brand strategy or a career. So I think the key is just helping them manage their internal stakeholder expectations about this is, yes, we're using AI, but this is not going to solve the world's problems. Like, let's really break it down into the area that it's focused on.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think managing expectations is a huge part of measuring the success of campaigns, and having an understanding that what you're optimizing for is a specific thing. And we want to be really clear about what is going to happen and what could go wrong. And I think that that's something that really does come down on our end as the people who are managing that sort of performance. Casandra, I want to give it one last go. Can you talk to us a little bit about testing and auditing best practices? I think I'm just asking too much of our bandwidth at this point. But what we do have is we have a question from an audience member that would love if we could talk a bit more about measuring brand awareness. So what are the best practices for measuring it, and or what are some reasonable proxies? And so, Ashley, maybe let's start with you.
Absolutely. So I am by no means just kind of an expert in kind of this upper funnel measurement, but I know there are obviously, tools out there, companies that do this, but those tend to be really, really big studies that are quite intensive from an investment perspective. They take a long time to do. This is stuff like Millward Brown, but they're really reputable and really great opportunities to understand just a bit more about your brand awareness. But there are also tools that you can use to measure kind of more at a micro level. So there are surveys available that you can kind of put into market that can be done online to just ask kind of whatever question that you have available. That would give you kind of a read on that. And if you are able to, do these on a regular basis, this will give you not only a sense of your brand awareness, but any changes you have, again, after you go into market with a campaign, after you put something that's really successful out on social media, as well as being able to just kind of, grab information around, what are your kind of social shares, what's happening on Twitter, on Facebook. That's kind of more of an organic share result. And again, tracking across time, how that changes with your efforts in market.
Absolutely. And Matt, do you have anything to add, knowing that obviously this upper funnel brand awareness play is really, as you mentioned, where your company comes into play when working with clients?
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to emphasize is traditionally, exactly as Ashley said, it's typically a very expansive study first, and done by the large market research consultancies. But I think the bigger point I want to hone in on is the designing once and measuring often. The key for really good brand awareness, we're finding amongst our clients, is we typically use a test and control, which means you'll have people that are exposed to the content and creative and people that are not. And there's sample methods to do that, or there's live methods to do that, depending on how you integrate the technology. But then from there, you can get a really good sense of the impact you're having at an attention level. Are you seeing drop off? At a brand uplift level? So what's the difference between just simply the first of mind or top of mind priority? And then getting into the engagement side, are you having different levels of engagement with different audience types? So one of the areas where engagement's really good from an emotion time series perspective is you can start to discover new audiences that you might not be tapping into or targeting. And then the final one is around memorability. So when you're starting to look into, is this still shifting from a more thoughtful brand, which means it's taking them a lot of cognitive load to think about your brand, to a more automatic response against the brand traits that you're looking for. So those are the areas that again, there are big market research consultancies you could go to, but there's over 850 tools in the market research space that you can now start to plug into. My suggestion for this, and a lot of our clients are taking this on, is a design once, measure often approach. So really nail that first one, experiment with that first one, make sure that you know how to talk about it internally within the organization, and then go from there. Just make sure it's tested on everything. So you're going to be looking for cost-effective agile toolkits that can, again, dovetail into the click-based ecosystem.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great sort of tagline for the approach to brand awareness and ultimately that beginning of the design experience overall. And thank you, Michelle, for sending that question through. We have a few more questions filtering in. So the next one comes from Jason. How do lower level associates influence the culture to encourage something like testing and learning? And so this is a little more about, obviously, the larger scope of the company. And I would love to get Casandra's take on this, of course. And so maybe if your audio is not working, if you can send it through in the chat as you have with a response to Michelle, that would be amazing. But Matt, as a CEO, I'd be really interested in your answer to this. How do you work with the junior associates to really push and contribute to these larger developments?
So actually, I'd have to say our junior associates are probably the most vital group within our organization. So we tend to trend a lot younger, mainly because when you're building artificial intelligence technology, you need perspective from all sorts of different sides. So you need people who come from all different walks of life, and you need a perspective that way. So we very much... I don't really make much of the decisions, if you will. We use again a design process. So we lean a lot on very kind of design oriented processes that allow a lot of that information to come in. We've got a whole playbook around it that we share with clients, and we find that it works well. A lot of our clients as well, even though it might be the CMO buying it, very quickly it goes to the insights manager, who then pawns it off on the intern. And so our champion in the organization for the execution of the project has so many reports and trying to make a career for themselves and are brand new. So we have a lot of experience working with juniors, and we really enjoy it because they ask questions. And honestly, I could tell you, when you're looking at stuff for a long time, when people ask questions, it's great. It's refreshing because it makes you change your viewpoint and strategy. So.
Absolutely. And Ashley, I'd love to turn the same question to you. So just to repeat it, how do lower level associates or junior associates influence the culture to encourage something like testing and learning?
Yeah, awesome. I think that's a great question. I think it's great if that's where you're working, that you're thinking about that already. I actually completely agree with Matt. Like, you are the people, you are the feet on the ground who are actually going to kind of do this test and learning. Ideally, you will be able to get someone at a higher, more influential level to be your advocate and talk to the work that you're doing. But if you don't have them immediately, I don't think that's something that you can't develop. There are a ton of tools out there that are completely free that you can kind of tack onto your strategies or your campaigns to either get that test and hold out methodology where you can show the incremental impact of your campaign, or you can put something together and analyze it where you do more of a pre-post, or you design a test that just kind of comes naturally from the setup of your campaigns already, and bringing that and showing that impact within your business to the leaders within your company is going to get attention, because you're going to be able to directly show the impact that you had on their business again. So I think that just doing the research into the tools that are available to you right now, leaning a bit on your partners within the marketing ecosystem to understand, what's available to you to help with some education around there is really important. But you are kind of the key to actually getting this work done. So keep on it.
Amazing. Yeah, and I love that question too. And I think it's, I think ultimately wanting to be involved and putting your hand up, and even as not just a junior associate, but an intern, as Matt pointed out, it's the best way to push and make your desire to be a part of that process from the ground up known. And it's great that that's being asked. And we have time for one last question before we wrap up from the audience. And this is from Paul. How do digital storytellers work with PPC marketers to achieve the best results? And so similarly, Casandra, if you want to respond in the chat, that would be amazing. If you want to give it a go on audio, we're happy to hopefully hear from you. But otherwise, Ashley, maybe you want to start with this one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So when I think about digital storytellers, and this is going to be me kind of making a few assumptions as to just kind of the question here. It's talking through how we take our customers from the upper funnel to the mid funnel, the lower funnel, to kind of become your customer at the end of the day. And obviously a pay-per-click marketer will really only care about what's happening in a very kind of small part of that ecosystem. So, they have their unit of measurement that they care about. So the question now is, how are we going to expand that past just the part of the funnel and that specific unit of measurement that they have, and connect all those pieces? So if we want to build a story around, what happens at the upper funnel around awareness, what happens at consideration, and what happens when they actually click, and then after that, how can we measure all those pieces, throw on a test, or at least some analysis around that to understand how one influences the other? So I think it's a matter of just kind of tying it together with your whole story of how someone might kind of come through the funnel, to actually have them understand how it affects A, their clicks, and B, the actions that happen after that.
Sorry, got stuck on mute there. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about trying to figure out how your larger storytelling can fit into that specific goal, as you mentioned. And Matt, you talk a lot about working on the larger brand storytelling elements. So what would your response be to how they can work with people that are more specific performance metric focused?
Yeah, it's always that we see this all the time. It's that delicate balance about having a mutual respect for the different types of data and how to approach the different challenges. But I think Ashley covered it beautifully, because it is about just stitching each one of those layers together and having an openness of mind to be able to kind of expand into the different realms. I myself I was actually brand new to media 5 to 7 years ago. It wasn't even my jam. I was interested in biometric technology for education and healthcare and stuff like that. That's where I come from. And so getting into media was very new for me. And I started the BBC, which is very much about premium content. I mean, like, we worked with Attenborough on his 90th stuff. That's where we learned our stuff. So when I started to expand to North America and I hit the performance world, it was a big shock. It was a little bit of a wake up call. And how do we have that conversation? And I think the key is around working with content groups like yourselves, and empowering the content group to be able to say that actually this is a brand performance metric that's helping us cut through at the brand level. And we saw some of this. Like, there was a great one with Huawei in the UK around environmentalism. And so they wanted to tell better stories around environmentalism because they knew that if they could shift that direction, they'd be able to compete with Apple. So it was about helping them with that narrative and getting metrics around that narrative that then the performance marketers could look at and go, oh, great, you're actually sending me more funnel. So this is great. So now we can start to sense check those proxies and sense check those metrics. And so it is two sides of the same coin, and it's just having that mutual respect of working with each other on that one to bring the story through.
Definitely. Yeah, I think ultimately being able to articulate why the one approach is really serving the other and vice versa is the best way forward, like you said. I want to thank all of you, Matt, Ashley, and Casandra, so much for taking the time to join us today. I also want to thank our audience for tuning in, participating, asking questions. It really is what helps us make these panels as interesting and also useful and practically applicable as possible. And I really encourage you to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Globe Content so that you can check out the next MarTech Morning and all of the other work that the Globe Content Studio is doing. Thank you so much to our staff who has helped us run this panel virtually amid the sounds of construction and everything else that's going on. And if you are looking to review this content, we will be publishing it as a video so that you can watch back the entire thing or share it with a friend. So stay tuned for that as well. Thanks so much. Again, I'm Jessica Robinson, a content strategist with the Globe Content Studio. Everybody have a great day. Thanks so much for joining us.